Besides some flaws, Final Fantasy 15 is an amazing game and one of my favorite games of all time. I love its story, characters, world, music, and especially the combat system. I have around 700 hours at Final Fantasy 15, including the Episode Sky demo, Platinum demo, and Judgment Disc demo. So I think it is time for me to share my thoughts on the game. In this video I will talk about the philosophy of the combat system from Final Fantasy 15 and why I think it has the correct balance. But first, let me recap a bit the previous Final Fantasies. Since Final Fantasy I, back in 1987, one of the major aspects of the franchise was to do a new, innovative and well-made combat system. You can see that as time goes on, the franchise tries to be less turn-based and more action. They even created the ATB system, which is a combination of turn-based with some timing. Today, in Final Fantasy 15, the game has finally become an action game. Now, the technology is good enough for us to freely explore the world without being interrupted by loading screens and turn-based battles. I'm not saying that I dislike turn-based, I actually love it, but I think Square Enix's dream has finally become true. Final Fantasy I and its turn-based system is a masterpiece. Imagine a time where Super Mario Bros. Was the big thing. A game with a crazy plumber that has to walk in nonsense scenarios in a platformer game fighting flying turtles and angry missiles trying to save a princess. But then at the same time there is Final Fantasy I, a game where you fight monsters, explore the world, train your characters, gain experience enough to use better spells, do new attacks. It just seems too much next to a game like Mario. This means turn-based system was the best way to use the power of the 80s video games to create your own fantasy adventure. But this combat system is so good that even today a lot of games use it in many different and creative ways. Recently, Road of Final Fantasy came out as a turn-based system, for example. But how does Final Fantasy fans like an action game? Yeah, it's kind of hard to that a lot of Final Fantasy players don't play games like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta because they dislike action-paced games. They want something that they can't stop and think instead of having to react fast to the enemy's attacks. So let's see how Final Fantasy 15 tried to make its combat system a good one for people that dislike action games.
Yet we're all very much alive.
The fundamentals of the Final Fantasy 15 combat system is very simple. You have the attack button to attack, of course, right? You have the dodge button to manually dodge at the right time, like most of the action games. You have the jump button to go to the air and do aerial attacks, or to simply evade from some attacks. You have the warp button, which makes you warp out of the enemies, warp strike at the enemies, or warp to specific places like rocks and some elevated areas to recover MP. And talking about MP, the magic points, now I'm going to say the true magic of Final Fantasy XV's combat system, the phase ability. If you hold the dodge button, you phase instead of dodging, in cost of MP. While phasing, Noct, the playable character, will automatically evade 90% of the enemy's attacks. At some enemy's attack, you have to manually dodge, jump or warp out to evade. But even so, most of the enemies you can evade all of their attacks by phasing. This means anyone bad at action games can hold one button to be safe and then play slowly. There's also other 3 party members besides Noct. There is Ignis, Prompto and Gladiolus. that can do special techniques that, while doing them, make not the player safe during the whole technique animation. There's the wait mode, a mode that when you stop moving, the game pauses and you can carefully aim the enemies to cast spells and attack. And there's also more, how healing items work. You can carry up to 99 types of each item, like 99 potions, 99 elixirs, 99 ethers, etc. You literally pause the game and choose the item you want with zero cooldown. And while using the item, you are safe. So even the person that is bad at the game, she or he can correct their mistakes with items in a safe way. But is it hard to get and buy these healing items? Actually, it is not. If you explore the world, walk around, kill enemies, do side quests, do hunts, etc., you get items everywhere. You also get a lot of money so you can buy these new items. There is a side character called Dave, that is the NPC with most quests in the game, and all of his quests gives you tons of items. You can also craft spells that can heal yourself while damaging the enemy, or you can use Ignis Regroup Technique or Gladiolus Royal Guard to recover your health, not to mention that you recover your health nearby rocks, trees, and some walls. Yeah, it is a friendly combat system. People can just stop attacking, start to phase, and evade almost everything while creating a strategy to successfully approach and defeat the enemies. The philosophy of the game is to prevent the player from dying. Everywhere in the game you have multiple mechanics to prevent the player from receiving the game over screen. Square even confirmed that at an event that they wanted to prevent death. So yeah, 15 is a game for those players that suck at action games. But how does it feel for players that want to feel the action system? How players that love Kingdom Hearts, Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, how can these people enjoy Final Fantasy 15? 15's combat system is actually much more complex than it looks like. You have 7 types of weapons: sword, great swords, polearms, daggers, shield, firearms, and machines. Each of these types have different movesets. The swords, for example, can do backward jumps with invincible frames to evade the enemy's attack. It also has a left and a right move to make better position yourself around the enemies. You can do a forward attack that usually stagger enemies, making their animation and attacks be cancelled. So this was just a brief example of the sword's moveset, but it is much more deep than that, because there are actually 7 types of weapons, like I said before. But since 2 of them are very simple, the machine and firearms, there are actually 5 types of weapons, with lots of movesets. But there's more. There's also weapon swapping. You can have equipped up to 4 weapons. Each type of weapon has different combo structures, with different movesets, and each type of weapon interacts in a different way with another type of weapon. So the great swords, for example. The great swords have a combo with 4 parts. Each part of the combo interacts in a different way with the other types of weapons. You can be at part 2 of the combo, swap to a sword, and then swap to the great sword to cut the part 2 of its combo and go immediately to part 3. This is so complex, but so complex that it took months for the community to figure out how it actually works. And now I will make things even more complicated. Sorry, but I have to explain this, okay? I didn't mention that there are 13 royal arms, and each of these royal arms are a type of weapon, which means there are not only 7 types of weapons, like I said before, but 20 instead. So imagine figuring out all their movesets and how each of these weapons interact with each other while swapping weapons. Yeah, very complicated. Final Fantasy XV has a lot of depth in its combat system, which means players can create their own playstyle and create all kinds of combos. But that's for those that want to dive in the combat system, and also for those players that want to use their action combat skills. So 15's combat system is simple enough for those that suck at video games, or action games in general, but also complex enough for those that like action games. It is a perfect balance between action and RPG slow-paced games. But there is a huge problem in Final Fantasy XV. It does not teach you about anything that I said before. It does not teach you about the weapons moveset. It does not teach you about weapon swapping. The players are meant to figure out everything by themselves. But even so, I think around like 90% of the players want to understand by themselves how things actually work. Just for you to have an idea, when I had around 200 hours at the game, I was still confused about a lot of stuff. Then I saw the videos from a YouTuber called Azeton XV, and I learned more about the weapons movesets. Then after some months, he did this video showing almost everything about weapon swapping. But even so, Azeton and the community in general could not figure out the great swords, okay? The community could not completely figure out how the great swords truly work. So I spent a month, okay, a month learning about the weapon, and I could figure out how it works, okay? So it took like 5 or 6 months for the community to understand how the great sword actually works. It was so complicated, but so complicated, that almost no one from the community wanted to learn what I discovered about, especially because the game is actually too easy. Hey, don't get me wrong, I think Final Fantasy XV is hard for a lot of people, but in my opinion, for most players, okay, Final Fantasy XV is an easy game because of all the helps I said before, like healing items, the phase evasion, etc. So why would you spend hours and hours and hours to understand how the Great Sword works, since you don't need to learn about it to play the game? This is not Dark Souls. At the Dark Souls series, you get good at the game, because if you don't do that, you simply can't beat the game. And also, when you get good at Dark Souls, you are heavily rewarded, because you can beat the enemies easily. While in Final Fantasy XV, using weapon swapping and move sets from the weapons actually makes the game a lot harder and complicated, making you do more mistakes than the usual. Another game franchise that also has a complex combat system is Devil May Cry, especially the reboot one, the new one. Yeah, that one that people love to hate it. I actually like the game. The combat system is amazing. The freedom for making combos is actually insane. You easily swap between 8 or 9 weapons at the same time and create different combos for different situations. But just like Dark Souls, you get good at Devil May Cry to make the game easier and not harder. Using its complexity makes the game harder and not easier, okay? You are not heavily rewarded by learning the combat system. That's a thing in Final Fantasy XV. But even so, I think it was an amazing job from Square Enix to create this complexity, because it makes players able to use their ideas to create their own combos. Also, even though the game gets harder when you heavily use its combat system, it becomes much more funny. You are no longer phasing and attacking, but attacking all the time instead. You swap between weapons and use their movesets to avoid damage while also doing damage. You also have the personal reward for doing a cool and useful combo at the right time. So now I've just showed you how good 15 is for people that like action games and for people that don't like action games. But I want to dive deeper than this. In my point of view, 15 plays like a turn-based game. You may think I'm completely crazy, so to prove my point, let me show you some little details from the game first. So one of the little details from the game that I want to talk about is about phasing, okay? Phasing is not 100% safe, like I said before. When you phase, you become invincible during just a few frames, but depending on the frame, you can actually get hit. I can't confirm which frame it is, but when fighting a lot of enemies, for example, you do get hit while phasing, because there are so many enemies attacking you at the same time that they will eventually hit you exactly at that frame that you are not invincible. It often happens with those level 47 Nilfheim soldiers that rotate their arms like crazy. Another little detail that I want to talk about, it's the techniques. The characters, they used to do long and slow animations before doing the attack of the technique. So the situation that made you use the tech can change. Let me give you an example so you can understand it better, okay? Imagine there are 3 enemies together. You then decide to use Tempest from Gladiolus since it does an area attack. But it takes so long for Gladiolus to use the tech because of its slow animation that the enemies can split, and now instead of hitting all the 3 enemies, you hit only one. Because Gladiolus, imagine Gladiolus there preparing for the animation, and while that the enemies just split apart. Each enemy goes to one direction, which means you won't hit the 3 of them again. Regroup, for example, attack from Ignis, is really random. When you use it, Ignis does a small animation before healing, which means the other 2 party members can indeed get hit while wait for the animation, and it may cause their death. It gets worse when Ignis does the critical regroup, a better regroup that gives you extra defense. The critical regroup animation is so long, like 2-3 seconds, that the party members used to get hit a lot while it happens. These and some other issues that I don't want to talk here, okay, because it will make the video longer, okay. But these and other issues made me realize that Final Fantasy 15 is actually a huge mess, that things are too random. If phase is meant to automatically dodge simple attacks, then why is there a frame that I'm not invincible, right? Why the techniques take so long to happen? Okay, when I use regroup for Ignis, I want to heal myself. Why people can get hit while waiting for Ignis to do the animation? This made me say negative feedback from the combat system during months. But after some time, I realized it actually makes a lot of sense. Let's think about all the previous Final Fantasies, I mean the main ones. In all of them, you always get hit. You always get hit and then you heal yourself. Or you use luck to evade. So imagine in 15 that while phasing, you do evade everything. Would you get hit? It would be harder for you to get hit. All of the randomness from the previous Final Fantasies are still at 15. Now combine this randomness to the weapons movesets that I said before. The weapons movesets are so complex and so complex that people will do a lot of mistakes all the time and get hit. At the Dark Souls series, each weapon has just a few movesets, so the player know when they are safe or not. So when you start playing Dark Souls, you pick a weapon and you look its moves and you learn it immediately. After a few minutes, you know everything about that weapon, okay? You know everything about it. But that's not how it works at Final Fantasy 15. In Final Fantasy 15, remember that I said that I had like 200 hours? Even playing during 200 hours, I didn't know the basic moves from the sword, the normal weapon that people most use. I didn't know everything about that weapon. So at Final Fantasy 15, people do a lot of mistakes because there are so many options for them that they will eventually do something wrong and get hit. Or they will do something that they didn't even know existed and then get hit, okay? This means that Final Fantasy 15 was designed in a way that even being an amazing player, the chances of getting hit is super high. You can't stagger enemies to death in most cases. You also can't read all the enemies' moves. That's why you can phase. That's why you can use so many items in a safe way. What I'm trying to say is that 15 still follows the basic rules from the previous Final Fantasies, even though 15 is an action game. 15 is not supposed to be Devil May Cry, okay? A game you use your combo system to stagger enemies until they die. Or Kingdom Hearts and Dark Souls, games with enemies doing attacks that you can see and react to them by defending yourself or dodging. Another game that Final Fantasy 15 differs from is Final Fantasy Type 0. At Final Fantasy Type 0, you usually die by one hit, which means you have to learn how to use the action to avoid damage. That's why I think Final Fantasy 15, even though being an action game, it looks like a lot to a turn-based game, okay? It's just that its fundamentals, it's about going slowly, okay? Every time you try to use the action in this game, everything gets harder, like I said before. And it doesn't make sense. You don't do a lot more damage, actually. You can do the same damage by going slowly, okay? 15 follow very different rules. Very different rules from the other action games. Okay, so that's it. That's what I wanted to talk about, okay? Showing you the basics of the combat system, then showing the complexity of the combat system and comparing it to other games like Devil May Cry or Dark Souls, and also comparing it to turn-based games from Square like the Final Fantasies, okay? And showing you that even though 15 is an action game, it follows rules from a turn-based game. It plays very different from a traditional action game. So, and also please give me some feedback, like did you enjoy the video? If so, please give me a like and tell me why. And if you disliked something about it, then also tell me so I can improve my videos, okay? And also, please tell me what do you think about this, okay, about the combat system from 15, about the things I said. Do you think I'm crazy, like I'm tripping here, or do you agree with me? Did I show you something you did not know, you didn't notice when you played? So please, always comment something for me. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for watching and bye bye.